we will, can you just do roll based on what you see there? Chloe, or do we have to call people's names off?
I can do it. It's Jennifer Rodriguez.
Here.
Margaret Gustafson.
Here.
Jennifer Delaney.
Present.
Patrice McCarthy.
Here.
Cynthia Ritchie.
Here.
And then Tiffany Coet is not present, and Shannon Merriman is not present, and Elsa Batista is not present.
Correct. Thank you. Approval of the April 11th meeting minutes. Is there any correction to the minutes or discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll have the minutes ratified, which we don't necessarily need to vote for. We can just say that they're ratified since there's no adjustments needed at this time. All right, we have advisory guests here from CPRL, SDE, and ECE. We also have a new admin assisting Chloe in the work. Thank you all for coming, and sorry for the delays of getting everything in. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have limited time and we have quite a bit to put in there in terms of like reviewing and seeing if there's anything that we want to move forward to the board or that we have questions about. Let's begin with 12A1, evaluation criteria for alternative certification pathways and cross endorsements. This was great conversation that I had with STE and got some background on in CFL as well. Our understanding currently is that each program has their own criteria already in terms of relevance of existing certification endorsement. Alternative certification pathways. Oh, this is cross endorsement. I'm thinking of another one. Let's go ahead and pull up the CPRL document. And I'm going to ask one of our representatives from CPRL to go ahead and present the findings and the research that they did on our behalf to the group and see if there's any questions about this or anything action that we would like to take on it. Who from CPRL would like to?
I can start off. I think Scheherazade can't unmute. I don't know, Chloe or someone who has like master controls. Are you able to unmute her?
I'm trying. I clicked allow mic.
Scheherazade, can you unmute now? Well, I will give this a whirl. And we are a duo. So Scheherazade, maybe you can just text me if there's something that I left off or give me a call. We'll think of a different creative solution. But essentially, so in the memo that I know you received, I can walk through some of this. We looked into possible criteria for alternative pathways to professional certification, as well as the cross endorsements. Jen, do you want me to talk to both now, or do you want to do one and then the other?
Do one and then the other, yeah.
Okay, so starting with professional educator certification, I know that you all spoke about this before. We started by sort of laying out the existing state of affairs in Connecticut. And then we talked about some of the alternatives that exist in other states as a way of thinking about what criteria you might decide to use to decide whether there should be an approved additional means for progressing to the professional certification in your particular state. And so the three criteria that we articulated that you might consider based on what we see in other states are the quality of the provider or supervisor of a proposed pathway. It's sort of both because in some cases you might be considering something like who's actually providing that professional development or that additional education. In some cases, you might think about that as a supervisor because some of these forms of alternative pathways are more like the national board certification where there's actually an evaluation that's being conducted. And so you'd want to make sure that's a high quality evaluator. So again, the first criteria is the quality of provider or supervisor of that pathway. The second is just the quality of that pathway. You'd want to make sure that it's something that actually is sort of worthy of consideration and having the recognition that it's something that would provide the requisite knowledge and skills to get to that professional certification level. And the third is the accessibility of that pathway, keeping in mind the fact that you wouldn't want to unduly shut out certain candidates and not others based on race and sort of other sort of socio-demographic characteristics or affordability. And so in the table that's mostly on page 3, it spans pages 2 to 3. We list those 3 main criteria and then some sub-criteria that you might consider when applying those criteria and entertaining proposals for alternatives to the master's degree as a way to demonstrate readiness for the professional certification. What might be helpful are the examples, like I said, from the other states. And so we describe that a little bit as well and talk about how you might leverage those particular criteria when evaluating the alternatives. And we're happy to answer any questions you have, or Jen, if there's something else you think we missed on this first piece regarding professional certification, happy to speak to that as well.
All right. Are there any questions about that or thoughts? I was looking over some of the 3 that you have in there on page 2, I think it is, right, of the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards. And one of the things that I had read about that, because I'd actually looked into it myself at one time or another, was that you have to renew. And I guess we'd have to consider that as a factor. What our expectation is that they kept that up, and what would be the downfall if they did not? Would they revert back in a different way, or do they have to just achieve it one time in order for them to consider national or professional with us and move forward, right? So those would be some things to kind of think about in that area. I do think that is a good way. It's very rigorous. There's specific requirements that are involved. There is cost involved with it, though, and I know that's one of the things that we were looking at even at the state level, was removing cost for our candidates as they move from one to the next. But I do think that's an interesting route to go down as well. Does anyone have any discussion or comment that they'd want to talk about? Looks like Liz, you have your hand up one time. Oh, Chloe had her hand up. All right. Liz, go ahead. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify something that I worry I wasn't clear about when I was also trying to figure out the teams issue, is that what is the responsibility of the board right now is to determine the criteria. And then the secondary step would be to apply that criteria to proposed alternatives, like to the national board certification, for example. So you'd first need to say, these are the criteria we will be using when we consider alternatives, and then you'd have a process for applying the criteria to potential alternatives like the national board certification.
Perfect. I see Patrice has her hand up. Go ahead, Patrice. I think you froze, Patrice. If you're able to hear us, Patrice, we can't hear you, and it looks like your image is frozen. If you want to type it into the chat, we're happy to read it out and then see if we have additional. All right, we will come back once that technical difficulty has been resolved. Anyone else have any questions about this? So if the expectation is that we are looking for criteria, do we agree with the suggested criteria here that is in the document? Is there anything that we would add to that criteria? Go ahead, Margaret.
Can you just walk through this a little bit further for me in terms of the implementation? So if we agree to the criteria in this, I just want to understand how the CERT board would be taking alternative pathways and applying the criteria. I have this image that I want you to dispel that would be everybody sending in, anybody who was hung out their shingle, sending in some alternative pathway that then either the board or the SDE staff would have to review. And so I just want to understand exactly the scope of what this means.
Go ahead, Liz.
I think I can unmute now. Yes. Okay. I'm here. Well,
There's Sherazad. Yay.
I'm here. Hi, everyone. So I think that's in part what the criteria meant to do. It's meant to like set like a rigorous bar so that anyone who is trying to apply would know that like you can't just hang up a shingle and like send through a proposal. I think in order to like further effectuate this, so right now in law, you have the authority to approve these alternative pathways. You also have this charge of establishing the criteria. But then there would have to be more work done to actually set up the processes that would be used to actually approve. And that would likely be done, you know, either you would do that through regulatory actions, or you'd have to establish those processes and regulation to include the criteria that you would be using to evaluate proposals. You know, or I guess you could recommend that that's done through the statute, if that's what your preference would be, but that would have to happen during the next legislative session. One thing to note here is that, and when you kind of dig into some of the this is more relevant for cross endorsement, so I'm kind of jumping ahead. There may need to be some further law changes to allow for certain types of alternative cross endorsement pathways. And so I would imagine that you'll need to do some more kind of deliberating on, you know, what you want the process to look like. You'd want to like agree on the criteria over the course of the next several months. You'd want to kind of think about the types of proposals that might be sort of desirable and use that to inform both of those things. And then there would likely have to be a recommendation for a law change depending on how you come out on that for the next session. So there's probably still more work to be done to actually like institutionalize the process for this. But, you know, in terms of what you need to report back on July 1st, you could sort of just report back how you're thinking about the types of criteria that you would be including in that process, if that makes sense.
And we're still just talking about like moving from initial to professional. Like that's what we're talking. We're not talking about endorsements. We're not. We're just talking about that pathway of moving from if we want an alternative pathway, because we might decide that we just want to kind of keep it where it is because the law literally just changed, and then reevaluate in 2 years' time, and or state that, you know, we would like to kind of investigate the criteria and maybe looking at one particular option, something like the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards for certification, right? So it's really up to us as to what we think we should do. The question then becomes, do we stay with what we currently have as it is, and then kind of move through the process or report, you know, our justification being that this law recently just passed removing provisional, and we want to more deeply look into the alternative pathways from initial to professional, and then provide even this report of possible alternatives for that. Now, I do see that Patrice is moving on the screen, which makes me think that her technology is working. So Patrice, if there's anything like,
I just want to make sure one thing before we move on is that you would have to report something this July on proposed criteria, but you could certainly do that and then think more carefully about how to like institutionalize the whole process after that.
Okay. Patrice, it looked like you were moving.
Miraculously at the moment, So go with that.
You're breaking up.
I'm sure we don't know the answer to this. The
Maybe
better.
turn your camera off.
Yeah, I would try to turn your
Yeah.
camera off and see if it'll just focus in on the audio.
Observations and some additional information that we might need going forward. Do we know how many national board certified teachers are in and what their experience might be that would inform our decision as to that as an alternative? And I also think that there might be a difference depending upon what you're teaching as to which alternatives other than a master's would be most important. So for example, my mother was a foreign language teacher. Her master's in Spanish from Middlebury clearly made her a more effective teacher and able to teach advanced level Spanish classes. That a master's degree might not be as important for someone in a different field. So I don't know, just things for us to think about, not an answer.
Good thoughts. Thank you. Liz, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and this is why, again, sort of, I think I'm worried that my initial presentation muddled this, but what you have to report on to July isn't whether you'd include national board or not. You have to determine the criteria. That's why we laid out the table. You have to sort of settle on the criteria you would use in a process that might need further sort of rule change or law change. But for now, the first step is sort of establishing the criteria that you would use to apply to any proposed alternatives like national board certification or something else. So the question before you most immediately isn't like, do we say yes to national board? It's what are the set of criteria that we would apply to these other things? And in most states, they fall in these three categories around the quality of the provider or the pathway. The quality of the provider or evaluator, the quality of the pathway, and the accessibility of the pathway.
So why don't we
Sort
just
of like
focus in on,
sub-criteria for each of those.
so why don't we go ahead and focus in on that table on page 3. Take a moment to kind of take it in with that lens that Liz just said, and see if there's anything that we want to keep, adjust, or think more deeply about, because we can certainly move this potentially to the board for our next meeting if need be. Now, Patrice, your hand is still up, but I don't know if that means that you want to say something else or if it's still up from when you initially.
Did we
Okay.
hear what she said initially? I didn't, it was choppy. I didn't hear what she said. But if others did, then that's fine.
Yeah, I think she was saying to like we wanted to check. I didn't hear anything before the national board part of it. It was kind of broken up in terms of like how many people have national board cert and what their so would you Patrice be able to type in what your thoughts were into the chat just so we can kind of digest them as part of this thinking, and we can also record them for the work that we do moving forward. But let's just give us all a minute to just look over 1 through 3. Great. Does anyone have any thoughts on those 3? quality of provider, supervisor of proposed pathways. Is there anything that would be added or removed from what's in that table?
The only thing I wonder is about like mastery of content. I guess that would just fall into curriculum alignment, maybe. Like I'm thinking of CAPE standards, for example, and like we have key assessments, of course. Some are standardized and some are not. They're created by us. But I would think that would be an important piece, like the progression of the program and those key assessments. But maybe that just falls into curriculum. That's
I
my
think that's
wondering.
worth calling out though, Jen.
Mhm.
I feel like that should be a strong piece because when I scroll back up in the document, I want to see that the pieces that we're holding in that master's degree or part, that we don't set up something that is inequitable.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the board has already voted to like have things like minimum content knowledge assessment because we want them to have a minimum mastery of content before, moving on. So I think that would be appropriate. I guess where would it fall though? Do you think that that's under curriculum or should it have a bullet point of its own so that it's clear that our expectation is, quality of
Mhm.
proposed has mastery of content?
I mean, it could be more around mastery of content or something around progressions or gateways, you know, that there's some type of way that the alternate provider has like those checkpoints where candidates progress, or not candidates, but they're already teachers, right? So how the teachers are progressing through that program, because there's maybe not some kind of standardized assessment for it, but they have that worked into their program. So I think it would be more content, like the curriculum has to be aligned, but then maybe assessment, maybe it's around assessment and adding that
I agree.
to
I think it's
this.
around mastery of content. So
Yeah,
some sort
yeah.
of feedback loop,
And I
a
would
measurement.
just, yeah, and I would just utilize some language from the CAPE workbook around that maybe, because it's pretty spelled out pretty well for us. Um, because like thinking of myself as an alternate program provider, that's a huge piece of how we're certain that people are ready to move on in the program at each stage and they're competent at completion of the program.
So then maybe
There'd
the
be something
suggestion
about
is,
competency at completion, mastery of assessment competency at completion of the program. So like they would have to show whoever's deciding whether or not they could operate that they have those components in their program.
so Liz, maybe, and Scheherazade, maybe we crosswalk this to CAPE's alignment
Yes.
and align a little bit more.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
do that. The one thing I'll just point out, I think an assessment strand sort of makes sense.
Mhm.
What we were trying to do, because a number of states do accept something like national board certification, that's not a program in the same way.
Mhm.
And so it's not sort of as one-to-one with CAPE because
Right. No,
it's
it
not
wouldn't
something
be
you're like
right.
enrolling in and
Mhm.
participating in.
Yeah.
But I think if you end up deciding you want this, we could, based on this conversation and the CAPE standards, come back with an updated table that tries to reflect what you just shared. And you all could look at that again, but
Mhm.
that's totally up to you. But we'd be happy to
Right.
take this idea around sort of assessment that is aligned to the standards and that would demonstrate the requisite competency to be considered in the evaluation
Right.
process.
Like we certainly don't want to open a can of worms. They don't need to be CAPE accredited. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm just saying that is a good resource to use to help us
Yeah.
finesse that language. Because the whole idea is we want maybe something new might come of this, right? So we're kind of assessing something that doesn't even exist yet, maybe, and hopefully some innovations will come out of this. And so we just need to make sure that whatever does happen, if something's developed from scratch from some organization in our state, they have that plan in place, that they are measuring competence at completion of the program in some way, even if it's all assessments that are designed by them.
Yes, and here into the chat, I can put some of like the CAPE language that we could potentially pull from. I don't know if everyone can see that in the chat, but I think, Jen, this is like what you're talking about in terms of the CAPE language. Is that right?
Let me take a look.
And while she looks, I just would say it seems like the advanced standards would be more applicable because these would not be thinking about programs
Good
leading
point.
towards initial licensure, and the advanced standards
Good point. Yeah.
are for folks who are already certified, who are then
Mhm.
maybe going on and doing another certification program in leadership or special education or something like that. I mean, they're
Mhm.
very similar, the initial and advanced, but the advanced may be more applicable in this.
Thank you for that, Lauren. All right, so it sounds like right now what we have is an agreement on the items that are in here. Is there anything that we would take out? Okay, and we would want this crosswalked to the advanced standards from CAPE to make sure it kind of reflects that, especially because we're probably going to be renegotiating the agreement with CAPE anyways. We want to make sure that it's similar in a way. So even if something gets changed or what have you, we kind of have that structure, which Jen was just talking about. So could we have, I guess we would need a motion that we agree with what's here, but we would like it crosswalked to CAPE.
Yes, I would like to propose that motion that we crosswalk the CAPE standards for competency at completion of a program at the advanced level.
At the advanced level. I do have, is there a second?
Second.
All right, Margaret seconds. Is there any discussion on that? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand via the raise hand option.
Jen, if you're talking to us, I think you're muted.
My apologies. All right, it looks like we have all hands raised. Yes. Chloe, were you able to get the count? All right, so it looks like that passes. Thank you. With that in mind, and with our deadlines kind of looming, and we have a May meeting, and I can't imagine that we're going to be able to have another ad hoc committee meeting before now in our May meeting with the board. Would we consider a motion to have CEPRL kind of work on that crosswalk, and then we have a proposed language for the board to review, discuss, amend in the board meeting?
So
Or
I
would we?
make a motion to have CPRO crosswalk, and then at the general meeting that we have to look at it all together and vote then. Is that what you're looking for, Jen?
It sure is. Thank
Yes,
you.
okay, you're welcome.
All right. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
All right. Thank you. Is there any discussion on it? All right. Seeing no discussion, let's go ahead and put it to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand now. All right, it looks like that passed unanimously. So April, that would give us that timeline. If we could get it at about 3 days, business days before the meeting, that would allow the board to at least review it and be prepared for the meeting to discuss more deeply for our next May meeting. And we can always touch base on the times and all that other kind of stuff for that. All right, so that part is underway. The next part of this one, does Scheherazade or Liz want to go ahead?
I can do it since Liz did the first part. Okay. All right. So in this section, we actually go into the somewhat new information that we didn't provide before about some examples from other states, again, by way of just like illustration or inspiration that you might consider as you're thinking about what alternative proposals for cross endorsement could be. So right now, I think we sort of alluded to this earlier. There was a change already made that for certain subject areas, a candidate for cross endorsement could just take the relevant subject area assessment. That is not true for a series of subjects, including special education, teaching English, bilingual, remedial reading, remedial language arts, or school library media specialists. So those folks can't avail themselves of that option. So these examples that we're offering are ways that you might think about how candidates could demonstrate knowledge and skills in other ways. One is from Wisconsin, one is from New Hampshire. I'll give a little bit of an overview, but Tom really knows a lot more about both of these examples, so he can fill in any details that I missed. So just like big picture, Wisconsin's is basically based on district professional development. And then New Hampshire has a few options that are kind of interesting. One's basically a portfolio approach, and another is based on national licensure. So in one thing to note here is that in Wisconsin, the pathway is only for cross endorsement, while in New Hampshire, the pathways that are in this memo are for both initial and cross endorsement. So let me just give a brief overview of these examples, and then like we did for professional certification, we have a table in here that kind of summarizes some of the criteria that you might consider. So Wisconsin is actually probably like the most interesting one, I think, at least. They have a special license that allows educators to teach in a new subject area or grade while under supervision, mentoring, and taking professional development that's provided by their employer. This was a change that was introduced after a sort of stakeholder working group process that the State Department of Education convened. To be eligible for this, you have to be licensed, you have to be employed in a Wisconsin school, or have at least 1 year of full-time teaching experience in that school, and you have to, Wisconsin school and have at least 1 year of full-time teaching experience, and you should be teaching in a grade or subject that's outside what you're currently licensed in. It's valid for 3 years, and it's not renewable. It's only valid in the school district that employs and provides professional development to the educator. And so while you're under that special license, you take professional development courses, and after 1 year's time, you are eligible to apply via basically a portfolio review process for a license in the new area. So there's a whole process they have for reviewing those portfolios, which includes rubrics that are sort of aligned to relevant content standards and that sort of thing. But that's an interesting sort of approach that we thought would be of interest to you. And then in New Hampshire, there are in general 3 different pathways that apply both to initial and cross endorsements. One of those, which is called demonstrated competencies, is the one where we think there might be some inspiration to be had. It's within that demonstrated competencies route, there's a few options. There's a couple that we highlight in the memo. One is a combination of portfolio assessment and an oral examination. And another is using national or regional licensure as the sort of justification for cross endorsement or licensure in this initial licensure in this case. So those are kind of outlined a little bit in this memo. There's a few eligibility requirements for this. You have to have a bachelor's degree. You have to sort of meet the basic skills assessment and other kind of whatever the testing requirements are for that new content area. And you have to have some teaching experience. So those are laid out. And then if you sort of scroll down, if you're following along in the memo, again, we have offered some criteria that you might want to adopt here. One is the extent to which the proposed pathway facilitates the demonstration of the requisite competency that you would want to see in someone who is eligible for a new area. And again, we've laid out some sort of sub-criteria and evidence you might use to assess that. And then accessibility is a criteria here as well. And so there's some criteria there that look similar to what you saw above. You know, there's obviously, depending on what the pathway is, a variety of ways that you could demonstrate this in the ways, and a variety of ways in which you would apply these criteria, just as in the case of professional educator certification. And then, you know, again, like accessibility, I think is probably really critical here. And the conversation we've had previously about cross endorsements, I know one concern is about making sure it's both rigorous but not overly burdensome. And so that's something that we sort of tucked into the kind of evidence or sub-criteria for accessibility here, that you'd want to make sure there's sort of a tight fit between any coursework that might be required and, you know, what teachers who will be teaching in that new area actually need. Let me pause there and see what Tong or Liz would add.
Yes, so I just want to zoom out again, just to review sort of the process here. And I know that we spoke with Jen about this, but so what's before you most immediately is to decide and report on the criteria by July. Because the idea is that you're deciding on these criteria, and then you would apply those criteria in a process to determine if you're going to have any of these alternatives come in. But so the real place to focus most immediately is on that table that's on page 9. In this instance, you'll notice that they're a little bit different. The first one is essentially about the extent to which you really can evaluate someone's readiness for the new area. And the second is the accessibility as the two main criteria that if you look at other states, they've considered when they've looked at these alternatives. You would need to decide on that criteria by July to meet your reporting deadline. And as the same is with the professional certification, to fully effectuate the process. And actually, if you were going to green light another one of these options, there probably, again, is sort of either through statute or regulation rule change that has to happen. That's not your decision right now. It's sort of what are the criteria that you're applying when you decide if you're going to try and effectuate some of those other pathways, if that makes sense. I just want to make that clear because I think I muddled it before. The most immediate decision is around the criteria, but we thought it would be helpful to lay out what other states, when applying criteria, have decided on, so you could sort of think of the range of criteria that you might want to consider.
Okay. With that in mind, I do see that there are several hands up. What I'm going to start with is some of our board members, and then I'll go to SDE. So I will start off with Margaret and then move over to Juliet.
Thanks, Jen. I just want to get a sense of the staffing levels for these, because I noticed for Wisconsin and for New Hampshire, right, it looks like it's all held within state employees doing these reviews. And so there would be, you know, a burden to the State Department of Education staff. And then thinking about, you know, if we did pursue something like this, would there be an opportunity to partner outsource, like with RESCs or something like that, to do reviews? So just a sense of the staffing in places that have considered portfolios and oral reviews because that's very resource heavy.
Do you want me to respond, Jen?
I was gonna say something similar to Margaret, and we did get rid of like the portfolio system because of things like that in the last legislative round, I believe, as well as for other reasons involved. So I think the criteria probably can get massaged into whether or not we want portfolio or not, or what that is. I guess my question would be, Liz, before you're going to answer that one too, is would we be able to get kind of like the pros and cons for these routes?
Yeah, so again, we can definitely do that and we can look more into the staffing question, but given that you have to decide criteria first, Margaret, to turn your comment into a criteria, you could add a third criteria around feasibility, for example. And so when weighing a proposal, you could weigh how well does this demonstrate, to what extent does this allow us to actually evaluate a candidate's mastery? To what extent is this accessible? A third criteria, to what extent is this feasible? So, and I'm just trying, I hate to do this, it's just that I want to help you meet your obligations. It's like the criteria first, and then sort of using those criteria to land on the programs. And
I think the board also had talked about before that whatever we do, including assessments, that it would have to be evidence-based, rigorous, feasible. So I guess when we're considering these things, we'd want to have that in there so it aligns to legislation and regulation, right? Evidence-based, rigorous, feasible, and considered valid and reliable for professional bodies. So maybe those become like the, subsets with kind of dots in there to align to that. So that we can kind of point back to, that's what we've kind of set as our goal, that whatever we're looking at things like, evidence-based, rigorous, feasible, valid, and reliable by professional bodies. But let's go ahead and go over to who else had their hand up. Julianne, go ahead.
I thank you. I appreciate the bringing us back about focusing on the criteria, because I do think that that's important. My first question was just clarifying my understanding. So we already have pathways to obtain cross endorsements. Most of them, you take a test and that's all you have to do. And then there are some that are very specific, that testing alone, and again, those tend to be the pedagogical remedial reading. There's a lot more than just taking a test. Things like bilingual education and TESOL, are a little heavier. And so those are the ones that require testing and particular coursework or experiences. So is the goal this is another option. So right now I want to add math, but I can't pass the test, or I don't want to take the test. This is looking for an alternative to testing. Is that that's what the goal is?
Well, I can tell you the goal from the CECC, which was for the initial reason this was put in from the CECC was because for all of those areas that still require coursework, there was a sense that there needed to be a more rigorous review process for alternatives than just getting rid of the coursework. And so it was initially to actually tackle the other things that were not tackled.
The ones that we're not doing. So
special
specifically
education,
bilingual, TESOL, remedial reading.
Yes.
Okay, and special,
Like, how would you think about, in a more thoughtful way, the cross endorsement process for those? But the way that thoughtful process was supposed to start was by getting you all to focus really on what are the criteria that you'd want to think about and apply to proposed alternatives. So again, the most immediate goal isn't to decide on the alternatives, but it's to decide on like the criteria that you would think about if you were going to add add to the alternative list. And since the legislation didn't sort of say only for TESOL, special education, whatever, we looked across, and it is the case that actually similar criteria are applied. It's mostly about the extent to which it allows you to actually evaluate readiness, like I said, which is the first one, and the accessibility. And on that first category, Jen, I think if you all voted to, you could add all of those sub-bullets that you named. Is it a valid, reliable, evidence-based, et cetera, if that's what you decide. And Margaret, if you all decide, I think you could add a third criteria. I mean, you all can do whatever you decide, but it makes sense that you might add a feasibility criteria, because I'm sure all of these other states are considering what is feasible to administer.
Right.
I would
And I think
just, go on.
Oops, sorry, Julian. I think that to kind of speak to what Julianne was saying, this board can also make the motion of that this is specific to the TESOL, special ed, certs, as opposed to making it more challenging for the other ones, right? I think that the thinking at the committee last year was, teaching our ML students and teaching our special ed students, they're our most vulnerable students, and we want to make sure that the folks that are working with them, have had a really good baseline and understanding of what they're going to be doing, and to keep it within that profession. And that's not to say that the cross endorsements aren't, the other ones aren't just as important. But when we're talking about our most vulnerable students, we really want to make sure that the folks that are in front of them are really well prepared and have a good foundation on what they're going to be doing when they're working with them. So this group can always state that we can keep the cross endorsement process for all other cross endorsement certifications, and that we're just identifying criteria specifically for these
few, right?
few, right?
Yeah, and that's my only concern that I would just bring up again. Say the reason that these were not included for testing is it's one thing you can prove I'm already a good teacher and I'm teaching biology and I can prove that I know chemistry by taking a content exam and I can teach chemistry. But these are areas that it's not a content test. It really is very specific as far as the criteria that you want for who can properly serve as a TESOL or a remedial reading or special education teacher. And then also keeping in mind that bilingual that's not in the regs. So the others are in the regs. Bilingual has its own separate statute. So we have to be very aware of what's in the statute for bilingual and be careful with that one.
So I think for the purpose of this, just to identify criteria, and then we can always massage what that criteria is applied to. We might decide that it's applied to all cross endorsements or just that pool of cross endorsements. But for the purposes of this meeting and for the board meeting, I think what we would need to do is take the vote on what sub criteria would we want to look at. Would it be evidence-based, rigorous, feasible, valid, and reliable by professional bodies? In addition to what's there, or added to what's there, or are we looking at just adding feasible? So that's the work of this group right now. Look at what's there and what are we adding or not adding to vote on, because then we can have CPRL kind of do that crosswalk for us. And then we can vote like we did the last time as well, or make a motion to then present that at the board to review with the other one. So mull on that for a moment, and if somebody wants to make a motion, feel free to raise your hand.
I would like to just kind of thinking. Okay, so the first thing is, I worry if we make it only for like the TESOL and et cetera, just because the way I see this is we're providing criteria for alternatives. And so we don't know what could come of this later, right? So maybe there could be some really innovative math person in the state who comes here, sees these new alternative approaches, and even though yes, you have to take the praxis, maybe they might come up with some awesome program, or they might get a grant to develop some program that teachers can go through than just taking a test. So I might teach one subject matter and I want to teach another subject matter, and I can pass the praxis, but I might want to learn more about how to be a highly effective educator in that field without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on another degree in that field, right? So I would, like, I'm a person who certainly would be attracted to some type of cool, innovative program where, yes, you know, in the regulations, I just have to take the praxis and I can get certified to pass that, to teach that. But I have the desire, I want to learn more, I want to explore it more. And so I would propose that, you know, we make this criteria for all cross endorsements. But then the other thing is, you were asking about, what was the second part you said, Jen? About making a motion for something else. I lost it.
We could make a motion,
Oh,
not
I remember.
now, our motion wouldn't necessarily be about like who it's for. I mean, you can certainly say that in your motion. I think our motion right now is what would we want to have in the criteria in general?
Yes, I remember now.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would support those pieces of criteria about the feasibility plus the validity and reliability of assessments. We just went through that in my program, and that is really important. It's something that we were insufficient in on our last CAPE review, and we just brought up to par, and it is truly making a difference in our program. And that's why the CAPE standards exist, because they're best practices, right? And not to say that they would have to go through CAPE, but again, CAPE kind of outlines that as well. So I think that would be a good place to look for crosswalking for the validity and reliability piece of it as well. And I am going to put the workbook and the standards I was referring to in the advanced programming here, and then I'll also plug in that data reliability with page numbers so everyone can go take a look at what I'm talking about when they have time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Liz, I have a question for you. When I'm also thinking about collective bargaining, right? There is a process. I mean, CAGS is a thing where you can take many courses, up to 30 courses, and in any topics that you want to, and then you can submit a letter to your district, if that's part of your collective bargaining, stating that you want it to be considered the same as like a 6th degree or like that version for like that kind of like pay increase or what have you. I'm also almost wondering if like there could be kind of a process similar to that, where like they're working with an EPP, they're taking courses in different topics over time. But if they get up to like those 30 credits, which would be the equivalent of a master's without kind of the master's certificate, if that might be something that we could look at as part of like the criteria process and or an option.
Yeah, I think that would
after.
fall. Yeah, I think that's like a perfect example of the type of option you might consider applying the criteria to. Basically, if you decide on is it feasible to do that? Seems like the answer would probably be yes if it's happening already. Is it, what are the assessments to use, if you were going to, what are the assessments that would be in play? How accessible is that to a range of folks? Would you be sort of biasing the participation against anyone? So, and then over the course, like I said, to actually put these alternatives into practice, and I think this is what Julianne was also reminding you of. It's one thing to identify the criteria, but then to actually, once you've applied the criteria, put that pathway into motion. In many cases, there will be either a necessary change in statute or regulation. So this sort of the process ahead of you is like decide on the criteria, then review potential options against that criteria, and then figure out based on that review how to actually put in place the pathways that you decide on, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Which
Margaret,
in
go
many
ahead.
cases will require rule change.
So I just wanted to loop back to Jen's example with the very innovative concept. I feel almost like the two tables of criteria would actually be very similar in that case.
Mhm.
Like if there's a very innovative something, I feel like the table right now for the cross endorsement makes a lot of assumptions about what's happening versus the first table that really goes back to look at the quality of the program and whatnot. So is there a difference why they're so different?
That
That
I can
making
speak to
sense?
because the real difference is sort of on the latter, because it's about it's sort of reflective of a broader movement to issue a cross endorsement if you've demonstrated competency. So it's on sort of it's if I've demonstrated readiness to do this, I should be able to, which is sort of the move that's being made. Sort of alone. If you look at the movement around going to professional certification, it's often that plus still allowing people to get it sort of in an activity-based way, I guess I would say. If I participate in this education that purports to be quality professional development or professional education, I am still sort of recognized for my participation in that. And that's why we had the difference between sort of recognizing participation in these, which is reflective of a lot of what's happening, versus for the cross endorsement, it's kind of a higher threshold because you're actually licensing in a new area. So there's more of an emphasis on the assessment piece. It's a more of a competency-based approach, generally speaking. Can you show that you can do the thing?
All right. Thank you.
You're on mute, Jen.
Sorry. I said a whole lot of things. Thank you for that discussion and those comments. Is there anything else that anyone wants to state before we take any motions in terms of this criteria in massaging it, changing it, adding to it, and then possibly voting to move whatever the changes might be presented at the board meeting? Kind of like we did the last time. So I think we talked about evidence-based rigor, feasibility, valid and reliable kind of into that in some way. So motion to take those ideas and put it into the criteria and maybe crosswalk it against something else.
Yeah.
And then present that to the board.
Yes. So I make a motion to add the feasibility, rigor, data, reliability, and validity to the criteria, and having CPERL do a crosswalk at least with section RA 5.2, which is the data quality section of the CAPE workbook. And I don't know if anyone else has another thought on what to crosswalk, but that would be one place to crosswalk.
And then what, bring it to the board or just
And then,
do that for the
yeah,
next
we can, well, depends how much time we have on the agenda the next board meeting, right? But we could certainly try to fit it in.
Right. Do we have a second for that then?
Second.
By Margaret. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, raise your hand now. Excuse me. Motion passes. Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is Paige. She's going to give us an update on the work. I'm sorry. This allergy season is giving me a run for my money. All right, so thank you. Let me unselect myself. So Paige is going to be providing us with CPERL and SDE kind of an update on where they are on that 0 to 3rd grade potential new endorsement, I believe. even though there's, and just to be clear, there's still another meeting to kind of finalize things. So it's really just to give us an update and an understanding in the work and see if there's any motions that we want to take just based off of that information for our next board meeting, knowing that they're going to have finalized information before the next board meeting. So I will give it up to, is Paige on here still? No, I don't see her on there. She was on at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm not
Hmm.
seeing anyone from ECE. There were a couple folks that were invited, so.
All right, I
She was
guess we're
here. I
gonna have
wonder
to.
if she lost connection and is trying to get back in, maybe.
Who else worked? Oh, there she is. Yay. Paige, how are you?
What are the chances of me sitting there for over an hour and then it was like, oh no, they're gonna need me now. Can you? Am I real time?
Yep, you are. You're ready to go. And I gave them the update that you'll be having a meeting between now and the board meeting to kind of finalize language. That this is a kind of just a higher level update on what's going on.
Great. Okay. I don't know how strong my signal is, so I'm going to share screen because I think it's easier for folks. Just somebody give me an audio if. Yeah. Right. Are you hearing me? And can you see my screen?
We can hear you, but if you're having trouble sharing your screen, maybe if you send. Oh, there you go. Yep,
Did it
we
work?
can see it. Yep.
Okay, great. So these are the high level talking points. This will only take like discussions. The larger board charges we understand it through ECHEC, and the work is for Connecticut education for birth to age 21 continuum. What we're working on is this early childhood work thus far that reflects a focus on birth to age 8, the birth to age 8 space within that continuum. The early childhood paths are available in level 1, 2, and 3 across all ages and settings is what we're seeking. I'm going to show you the chart in a second. And we're evolving this language. Again, this has not been lawyered, but this is essential content to the specifics of level 3 is that there's a non-State Department of Education certification or credentialing program by degree or other pathway, and that specifically the purple relates to the regulations changing the 112, which is birth to K, and the 113, which is pre-K to grade 3 endorsements, to a new number. Endorsement for professionals in the early childhood field to utilize inclusive, developmentally appropriate practice for all early care ages and educational settings that serve birth through age 8 children up through grade 3. That gets us our language. And this is just us understanding, excuse me, that we have this container. Sorry about that. Too much pollen. We have this container and then the full details get overlaid. One of the questions is, what is the levels 1, 2, 3? These don't have to be this specific, but this is the national portability for a certificate, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and how that can play out through NACE. So that just gives us a sense that this level 3 has many pathways, including a State Department of Ed. There's a whole bunch of details here that I'm going to hold off on because that's what we're going to do with CPRL. How can I help beyond that?
I think one of the questions that had come up earlier was ensuring, and I don't remember the exact certification or programming for the early childhood, and I think Margaret could probably knows better, but wasn't there a specific that we wanted to ensure that it was aligned to for those early years?
Right. So we had talked about, and I've talked with Paige and her group about this too, about the 12 early childhood credit minimum to make sure that those competencies are addressed. And I'm pretty sure Paige has that somewhere within talking points, probably on another page.
We do have it down in the details. I think, so I can put a note here for you to see. The catch is that people wanted to make sure CPRO's advice is we're not doing the refinement, we're doing the container. So I'll put a note in here.
Right. So the competencies are intro to early childhood education, child development, health, child and development, the child family school partnership class for competency, and health, safety, and nutrition. It's been a long week. I don't know how many times I've said those 4 competencies.
What was the last one, Margaret? Sorry, I didn't type fast enough.
It's okay. Intro to early childhood education.
Great.
And so that aligns with our qualified staff member legislation for OEC. And also into the blue ribbon panel, the governor's blue ribbon panel accepted recommendations.
Great. So we can make sure that's in the container.
Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to pose or any thoughts that they had on exploring this, adding this? Okay. So you guys, just to kind of get an idea, Paige, you guys are having your meeting when again?
We meet Tuesday.
Okay.
She says with a bit of a Friday brain, but we meet Tuesday. So I don't know if we want to refine the language and then get back to you, or if you need to make a motion now that, like you did before, with assigning the language. But we went way deeper. Other people can speak to this too. We went way deeper on like cross endorsements and the other relationships to the other areas. But we know that's the devil of the detail that I think comes after this first step.
Okay. So your meeting is on the 6th. We have our next meeting on the 12th as a board. So I can't foresee, and I don't want to overburden as well, because I know that people are on multiple ad hoc committees currently, as well as other obligations. So I really can't foresee us being able to look at the legislation or the language that you guys will be proposing to the board prior to the meeting. So I leave it up to the board. Would they prefer to hold off on bringing it to the board until the April meeting? Or would they like to vote to have whatever is kind of finalized by ECE, CPRL, and SDE brought to the board on the 12th for review by the full board?
So Jen, just you're making sure I'm understanding. You're asking if we want to do this in ad hoc first or go straight to,
Correct.
right? Okay. Does the
Just
timeline matter? As far
I
as what we
think-
need to have ready for July or June? Okay.
I think it's July, correct? Go ahead, Liz.
So this initially came up because it's in your July table around the endorsement area banned. You could decide to do it later. The language that we're preparing right now really creates the new endorsement area, and which I think, in case I think this was up, Paige and her team have just temporarily labeled 172, but basically you take the 112 and 113 and turn it into a new endorsement code. So that will require either statutory change or regulatory change. It's not something you can just do through guidance. And so that's the thing that we're focusing on right now. So you can sort of, there aren't like surprises, I guess, if you want to move it to the broader cert board. There aren't like a lot of details in that, or I guess that's stating the full idea of what it is. And so you could talk about the questions right now. We're just working on the technical aspects at Paige's request of creating that rule language, which would create the new endorsement, phase out the 112, 113 in terms of being issued moving forward, making clear that they would need to adhere to the NIAC, if I'm saying that abbreviation right, and allow the cert board to issue guidance on a lot of the other content that's contained in this document. So those are the sort of the 4 things that a rule change would do.
So Margaret, do you think we would need to come back to ad hoc and then go to cert board, or do you think we should just go straight to cert board?
I guess I'd be inclined to go to the cert board to begin the
Okay.
conversation there, because I think that's
Okay.
the place where we're likely going to have more questions, if there will be questions.
Okay. Then I make a motion to go straight to cert board with this.
So to present language at the May 12th certification
Yes.
board.
Yes.
My question to, do we have a second on that?
Second.
Margaret and Dr. Ritchie second, I think. I heard her voice, but I'm not sure if I saw her.
Yes, it was me.
All right. So we have a second. Is there any discussion? I have a question. I don't see a hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and ask the question. If you guys are having the meeting on Tuesday, what is your timeline in finalizing language so that the board can review it prior to the meeting? Because this is going to be a meaty one. And we want to make sure that we give people time to really be able to review it prior to the May 12th meeting. So what would your turnover potentially be so that we could get it into the hands of the board members?
Yeah, I can answer. So, and this, I'm gonna also clarify something. Okay. So just that container that Liz went through with those 4 elements, we can do in time for your cert board meeting. That container could live in statute or regulations. The problem with statute is that you have to wait till next January to make that happen, because now it's too late. So you could just do it in regulations, I think. We'll confirm that and initiate the regulatory process earlier. But then you would also have to create the guidelines that would contain the like detail on the program requirements. And so is it your view that like the container part we can get done by then, but the rest of that, I don't think we're ready for. So if you're just looking at the container, I think May 12th is reasonable. If you need the rest of it, no.
So for the container, would it be what day? So they need to have it early enough to even read the container. So when would that be available after Tuesday?
I think it would, if it's like ready by Thursday. Is that too late?
I think Thursday would be good. Sure. They have to have any material at least 24 business hours before the meeting. So Friday is the minimum, but I would like to get it before that to give them time to kind of review it, more than 24 hours beforehand. So that would be great. Does anyone else have any other questions? Oops, sorry.
I was just saying it's not going to be very long. It's gonna, so it should be straightforward to review.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Liz.
And just a point of clarification, even though we just chimed in now, which is also what we said to Paige's group on the actual cert board meeting, This is not an area where we've done a lot of research, so any substantive questions around the creation of this should really be directed at Paige and her group. Like, we're just like helping type up. We're helping figure out how to write up the change. We don't have the expertise on like why this new endorsement area or anything like that. That's all the experts on the ECE side.
Correct. And Paige had already sent us an email stating that that they would be able to be at that meeting because she was asking about dates, right, Paige? So it sounds like they'll be there.
Yes,
Okay.
and perhaps other colleagues, and certainly all the other OEC, SDE, wise brains too.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. So are there any other questions or comments at this time about that, about the motion? All right. Seeing none, let's go ahead and put that to a vote. Raise your hand if you are in favor. All right. We have 4 currently. Do we have any against? Unselect. And do we have any abstentions? All right, looks like the motion passed. All right, I think that was everything that we had on our agenda for today, and we are only 3 minutes past our time, so well done, everyone. Barring any additional conversation that needs to be had, I would cater a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Jen.
Second.
Seconded by Margaret. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. And we've got 4 of our 5. Right. Looks like we've passed. Thank you, everyone, for your work and involvement. We appreciate you and look forward to the continued support. SDE, I can't thank you guys enough. You guys have been meeting with me
Thank
to like
you.
build my background and understanding. So thank you so much. And I know that you've been meeting with CPRL and the other organizations. So really appreciate the support and understanding. You guys obviously are the experts in the room when it comes to what's happening. And we bring different lenses to that work. And we appreciate having that background and understanding from SDE. So thank you so much. And CPRL, we will be working with you more. See you soon.
Thanks,
All right, have a good
everyone. Bye.
Bye.